The ceasefire between Iran, the United States, and Israel is holding in the sense that no one is actively shooting at anyone else for now. But there's plenty of non-kinetic conflict going on. U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered the U.S. Navy to blockade Iranian ports, and some are saying it might have been better to do that before threatening to destroy Iranian civilization. But live and learn, as they say. Meanwhile, Israelis marked Holocaust Remembrance Day this week amidst grim reports of rapidly escalating anti-Semitism around the world and economic hardship at home. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Shalom, everybody. I'm Barry Siegel, and well, friends, we should start with the big story this week. And as is often the case, it's about something that is not happening. Iranian and American military forces are not actively shooting at each other, nor are Israeli forces shooting at Iranian forces. However, there's plenty of action and rhetoric that could quickly ignite into more action. As has been widely reported, the U.S. Navy has moved into the Strait of Hormuz and begun operations to clear mines. President Trump has also declared that Iranian oil tankers will not be allowed to go in and out of the strait as long as Iran continues to impede access to other countries' ships. The Iranian regime has responded by saying that this is an outrageous act of piracy, which is almost comically ironic because they've not just blocked vessels trying to sail in and out of the strait, they have fired on vessels trying to sail in and out of the strait. If it's an act of piracy for the U.S. Navy to block Iranian ships, what do we need to call Iran's actions in this situation? I would say it's at least an act of lunacy, as well as piracy and maybe other things, certainly blackmail. But wait, there's more. Iranian ambassador to the UN, Saeed Iravani, issued a statement this past week demanding reparations from Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, and Jordan for their participation in the war against Iran. Also this past week, a report was published showing that the regime executed 1,639 people in Iran in 2025, the most since 1989. But somehow, the regime still managed to get appointed to the influential UN Economic and Social Council. Can you believe it? This catastrophically obnoxious bit of hypocrisy might just be what it takes to finally convince some of the people who are effectively acting as lawyers for Iran's regime in its war against America, and I would even say civilization in general, that they're on the wrong side. On that note, I have to switch briefly to commentary mode for a moment and address the comments recently made by Pope Leo XIV about the war. Now, I need to preface this by saying that his statements have been made publicly, and I have no problem addressing them in public. I also have tremendous respect for the humanitarian work that the Roman Catholic Church does all over the world, including in Israel. I also understand that the concerns the Catholic Church has always had for humanitarian issues are part of what's informing Pope Leo's stance. However, 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33 says, "For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints." This passage is very practical because it tells us that when we see confusion, especially when it's in the household of faith, we know that it is not coming from God. With that in mind, I can't ignore the tremendous confusion Pope Leo XIV seems to be suffering from. He apparently does not believe this is a just war, as understood by Christian theologians throughout the centuries. He seems to have bought into the idea that this is a colonial war, that the Trump administration is fighting out of a greedy desire to control Iran's oil fields. Well, to his credit, he doesn't seem to be entirely letting the Ayatollah regime off the hook, and some of his comments indicate that he's not happy with them either. That having been said, I asked ChatGPT if Pope Leo XIV has ever spoken out publicly about the terrible human rights abuses in Iran, and he has not. He has also never spoken out publicly against any of the terrorist attacks carried out against Israel by Iranian-backed terrorist groups. He has expressed concerns in recent days for the suffering of Lebanese Maronite Catholics because of Israel's battle against Hezbollah. But although he has attempted to keep a neutral tone in these general statements of concern, it's obvious that he thinks Israel bears the responsibility for this situation, while Hezbollah is at most a bystander. As an Israeli and an ordained servant of the living God, and as a human being, I find Pope Leo's moral stance on these issues to be very difficult to understand and impossible to accept. Once again, God is not the author of confusion, and a man who claims to be God's representative on this earth shouldn't be publicly expressing moral confusion. There is one side in this war which is flawed and imperfect, while the other side is catastrophically evil and dangerous, and Pope Leo shouldn't have any trouble figuring out which is which. By the way, we can also talk about the responsibility to protect clause in the just war argument, as President Trump attacked the regime, at least in part, to punish them for their slaughter of protesters in January, over 45,000 and climbing all the time. This will perhaps have the effect of deterring other despotic regimes from doing similar things in the future, and the Pope should acknowledge that. U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham summed it up in a short statement this week directed at Pope Leo, saying, quote, "You're a good holy man. You don't understand the evil of Iran, and you're miscalculating here. The Catholic Church, God bless it, in the 1930s didn't really get Hitler, and you really don't get this regime," unquote. Well said, Senator Lindsey Graham. Now, we'll leave it at that because we've got a lot more material to cover this week, so we'll switch back to straight news mode now. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has candidly told the Israeli people this last week that Iran could break the ceasefire and start firing missiles at us again at literally any moment, and we need to be ready. However, more talks between U.S. and Iranian officials are tentatively scheduled to take place in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan, in the near future. The 2-week ceasefire might be extended during those talks, or it might not. Ordinary people like you and me will just have to wait and see, and of course, I urge you to join me in praying for this situation. Although the joint Israeli and American attack on Iran's political leadership and its military and industrial infrastructure included some amazing tactical successes, the overall strategic result was not conclusive. And there are still a lot of things that could go wrong and lead to an overall strategic setback for America and Israel. The entire world is suffering from higher energy prices due to the ongoing standoff in the Strait of Hormuz, and a lot of pressure is being put on the Trump administration to just let the regime have whatever it wants so that it'll agree to fully open the spigot. Needless to say, this is infuriating, and it's also a sign of the somewhat pathetic depths to which much of what we once called the free world has sunk to. But here we are, folks, for better or for worse, so once again, please join me in praying for the political leadership in Washington, Jerusalem, Vatican City, and beyond throughout all of Europe. Remember, we are commanded to pray for all those in positions of authority, whether we voted for them or not. Now moving on, although there is a shaky ceasefire with Iran and currently no ballistic missiles, thank God, that are coming at Israel from there or from the Houthis in Yemen, there is no ceasefire between Israel and the Iranian-backed Lebanese Shiite terror militia Hezbollah. Fighting continues despite an Iranian demand that there be a ceasefire on all fronts in this war. Candidly, although it is in Israel's interest to continue pounding Hezbollah, Jerusalem is also doing America a favor by ignoring this demand. This gives America leverage in negotiations as it makes it clear to everyone that Iran is not calling the shots here. And as President Trump says, they don't have any cards except the extortion they are able to carry out by closing the Straits of Hormuz. They are going all over the place saying they won this war, and this is ludicrously absurd narrative is even being echoed by a fair number of useful idiots in Western media circles. But the fact that such a high-profile demand is not being accepted by America and Israel makes it clear to everyone that they most certainly did not win this war, and they are in no position to dictate the terms under which it will end. Well, we'll keep an eye on this space, but for now, let's take a closer look at the situation on the ground in Lebanon and northern Israel. Large numbers of rockets and missiles have been fired into Israel's north over the last several weeks, but the IDF has sent large ground forces into southern Lebanon to push Hezbollah back away from the border, and this is having an effect. Fewer rockets, drones, and missiles have been fired into Israel, and most of the weapons that Hezbollah is continuing to fire are coming from north of the Litani. However, the Air Force is also pounding Hezbollah positions in these areas and methodically destroying launchers, rocket stockpiles, and other strategic targets. According to IDF estimates, Hezbollah has suffered an estimated 1,400 fatalities and many more wounded in the fighting since it entered the current conflict by firing rockets at Israel in early March. There have also been casualties amongst the IDF troops, I'm sorry to say, including several fatalities and many more serious injuries. Much of the Hezbollah fire recently has been directed against IDF troops inside Lebanese territory, and for this, Hezbollah ironically deserves some credit as compared to Iran, because they were shooting indiscriminately across the border to Israel against our civilians. So, they're doing better at following international law than their Iranian masters. Now, I've said it many times that if they would shoot at the IDF more than Israeli civilians, not only would they be in adherence to international law, they'd probably also be doing themselves more strategic good. Well, I'm glad they didn't do that because it brings us closer to the day when they will lose this war and we can all get on with our lives. But I still hate to see what these rockets and missile attacks on Israel's home front have done to my friends and neighbors and even my own family. In the coming days, Israeli diplomats will travel to Washington for direct contacts with their counterparts from the internationally recognized government in Beirut. Needless to say, this is another demonstration of Iran's inability to dictate terms regarding this war, and its proxy Hezbollah is also furious. The leadership of Hezbollah has issued statements demanding that the government not take part in these talks, claiming that it damages the cohesion of Lebanese society and so on. These statements ignore the fact that a solid majority of Lebanese society blames Hezbollah for dragging them into a war with Israel for the sake of the Iranian regime. Switching to commentary mode, I must also mention the Lebanese armed forces, which said several times starting in late 2025 that they had completed the mission of clearing out Hezbollah infrastructure south of the Litani River. They provided evidence of this, and I was one of those who saw the videos and gave them some credit. I still give them credit for all the work they did, which needed to be done. However, I must also add my voice to those who say it wasn't nearly enough, and the IDF absolutely needed to go back into southern Lebanon to finish the job once and for all. The undeniable fact of the matter is that the government and LAF simply don't have the capacity to take the kinds of actions that are needed in this situation. The only force in the area that is ready to do what must be done is the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. The other force in the area, by the way, is the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, or UNIFIL, which has been deployed in southern Lebanon for decades and has accomplished absolutely nothing. Zilch. Hezbollah dug tunnels and bunkers literally inches away from UNIFIL bases, and no one did anything about it. This is documented, by the way, and UNIFIL doesn't even try to deny it. Furthermore, in recent weeks, some UNIFIL soldiers have been wounded in crossfire between IDF units and Hezbollah fighters, but the UN has protested exclusively to Israel about that. I think it's a painfully apt metaphor for the entire UN effort in Lebanon going back decades, and it's long past time for UNIFIL to be withdrawn because their presence is not just useless, it is actually a huge part of the problem. Now, switching back to news mode, we also need to take a quick look at the Houthis in Yemen. They've only fired a few missiles and drones at Israel in this current round of conflict, and they've made some noises about blockading the Bab el-Mandab Straits, but otherwise they've mostly stayed out of it. It's not exactly clear why, but I'm glad to see this. It's one less thing and headache that Israel and the United States need to manage amidst this very dangerous and volatile situation. Not too long ago, we're talking about the threat of the Houthis sending large numbers of ground forces to Jordan to try and invade Israel from the east. I believe that threat has receded, but we still need to keep an eye on it and pray against these insane wicked and evil, devious plans. As a footnote to all this, Uganda's army chief issued a statement this past week offering to send 100,000 of his soldiers to Israel to assist in the battle against Iran. It's nice to know we've got a friend. Bravo, Uganda. But I have to point out that in the same statement, the general also demanded that Turkey give Uganda $1 billion along with the most beautiful woman in the country for himself. Some of us are old enough to remember when Uganda was ruled by a guy named Idi Amin Dada, who was also friendly to Israel while also being kind of eccentric. You can't always pick your friends, especially when you're the world's only Jewish state. This is also relevant when we look at the results of this week's past election in Hungary, which saw a friend of Israel named Viktor Orban voted out of office after 16 years. His replacement is Peter Magyar, a center-right politician who is not unfriendly towards Israel and also much more palatable to the rest of governments in the EU. My advice to Israel's leaders, in case they're watching this, is to tread lightly, bid Orban a respectful farewell, but give the new guy a chance. Now, I think that's a pretty comprehensive look at all the wars and rumors of wars that we're dealing with in Israel this week, so in the remaining time, I want to look at some other stories, including a brief look at the economy. As has been widely reported, Operation Roaring Lion has included a massive air campaign against Iran and an equally massive ground campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Large numbers of reservists have once again been called up, leaving behind homes, farms, schools, families, businesses, and jobs. Ben Gurion International Airport, which directly employs thousands of Israelis and indirectly supports tens of thousands more jobs all over the country, particularly in the tourism industry, has also been largely shut down for the last 7 weeks. Most schools returned to in-class learning for the first time in 6 weeks last Thursday, and many businesses have also slowly begun to reopen and operate at full capacity. Now, this is a snapshot of some of the opportunity costs Israel's economy has suffered. But this week, the finance ministry issued a report including the price tag the government has paid for this war, and it was a large number, roughly 35 billion shekels. Most of that money was spent on procurement for weapons, fuel, ammunition, and other things the IDF needs to fight this war. But it has also included paying salaries for all those reservists and the purchases of enormous amounts of food, uniforms, and other supplies needed to keep them mobilized. By the way, for Passover, we helped reach out to 1,000 soldiers of the IDF to celebrate Passover across the Lebanese and Gaza Strip borders. Never did it before, and I'm so glad we were blessed to do it. I probably don't have to tell regular viewers of this program that aside from the year or so following the Yom Kippur War in 1973, the IDF has never had large numbers of reservists mobilized for an extended period of time. For most of its history, Israel has had a standing army of around 150,000 young recruits and career officers, while the overwhelming majority of the 500,000 or so reservists have also been mobilized for brief periods of service or training. Only in extreme emergency cases were more than a few tens of thousands of reservists mobilized at any given time, leaving most Israeli men to stay at home, work their regular jobs, and otherwise support their families. This allowed for a stable economy and civil society most of the time. This system worked, more or less, for decades, but after the last 2.5 years of almost continual mobilization of between 100,000 and 400,000 reservists, the system is coming under enormous strain, and so is the economy. Last Monday evening, Israelis began Yom HaShoah, the day of remembering those who perished in the Holocaust, and also those who fought the Nazis in resistance movements, particularly the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. This year, Yad Vashem estimates that roughly 100,000 Holocaust survivors are living in Israel, and of course, every year that number gets smaller. Soon there won't be any left, but we will always remember them, and in Israel there are many formal events dedicated to this, and we hold some of those social events at the Millennium Center of Vision for Israel. Now that leads us into the other next big sad story, which is about the truly terrifying rise in anti-Semitic attitudes and physical violence that is being reported all over the world. To switch briefly to commentary mode, in my capacity as an American citizen, also as an Israeli citizen, I have voted conservative for most of my life, but I am absolutely horrified to watch what is reportedly happening among the rank and file of the Republican Party, not only the Democrats, all over the United States. I'm talking about the rhetoric openly admiring Hitler and blaming Jews for everything from gay marriage being legalized to Joe Biden's disastrous immigration policies. Of course, Israel is also being blamed by many Republicans and Democrats for dragging President Trump into a war with Iran and driving up the cost of living in the United States and many other countries. It's not just the usual suspects like Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, and Nick Fuentes who are throwing this nonsense around. Anti-Israel rhetoric, which easily blends into anti-Semitic rhetoric, is also becoming very popular on the political left. The leadership of the Democratic Party in the United States and many other governments around the Western world are increasingly hostile to anything and everything related to Israel and the Jews. It's becoming more and more normalized all across the ideological spectrum and in all kinds of media forums, and that trickles down to street level. Therefore, no one should be surprised by the growing number of violent attacks on synagogues, Jewish community centers, and individual Jewish people. Now, regular viewers know I like to end these reports with some good news, so here it is. The anti-Semitism in the world is a result of spiritual issues, and the Bible gives us the way to push back, and that's by prayer. Every one of us can do something about it, because every one of us can pray and ask God to open the eyes of the blind and have mercy on the afflicted. Pray for people to have God's heart for Israel and the Jewish people, and to adopt the biblical perspective on all these issues. Pray for moral clarity and against confusion. Remember always to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, because this city is important to God, and the Bible makes that very clear. So with that, I'm Barry Siegel, and this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel. God bless you and shalom.